Feltar stood on the observation deck of the Cytherian warship, watching the small blue planet below. Earth looked so peaceful from up here. The swirling white clouds and green continents gave no hint of the strange creatures living on its surface. His crystalline skin caught the light from the ship's panels, creating small rainbows on the metal walls. Feltar had been a warrior for over 200 Earth years. He had fought in 12 major campaigns across the galaxy. He had seen worlds burn and civilizations fall, but he had never seen anything quite like humans. The first human ships had appeared in Cytherian space 3 months ago. They were crude things made of metal and primitive electronics. The Cytherians could have destroyed them with a single thought. But something about these creatures made the High Council curious. Humans were loud. They were emotional. They made decisions that seemed completely random. When Cytherian diplomats first met with human leaders, the meetings were chaos. Humans interrupted each other. They showed anger, joy, fear, and sadness all in the same conversation. They touched each other for no logical reason. Feltar's species had evolved beyond such primitive responses long ago. Cytherians made decisions based on logic and calculation. They felt no fear because fear clouded judgment. They felt no anger because anger led to mistakes. They had bred out these weaknesses over thousands of years. But then the Devourers came. The first reports arrived. During a routine patrol mission, an entire solar system had gone dark. When scout ships investigated, they found nothing but empty space where planets used to be. Not destroyed, consumed, eaten completely, leaving not even dust behind. The Devourers were unlike any enemy the Cytherians had faced. They were a hive mind of dark creatures that could absorb matter and energy. They grew stronger with every planet they consumed. They could turn captured technology against its creators. Worst of all, they learned and adapted faster than any organic species. The Cytherian fleet had engaged them twice. Both times the battles had been disasters. Cytherian weapons were absorbed and improved. Their shields were cracked by their own. Technology turned against them. Their careful battle plans fell apart when the enemy adapted within minutes. That was when the High Council made an unusual decision. They would ask the humans for help. Feltar thought it was madness. What could these primitive creatures do that the mighty Cytherian military could not? But orders were orders. He found himself assigned to observe human military tactics and fight alongside their soldiers. The human military base on Kepler 442b was a shocking sight. Where Cytherian facilities were clean and organized, the human base was a mess of activity. Soldiers ran everywhere carrying supplies. Mechanics worked on vehicles while shouting at each other. Officers held meetings where everyone talked at once. Feltar was introduced to Squad 7 of the Human Defense Corps. Their leader was Captain Kim Tae-ho, a man in his 40s with gray hair and scars on his hands. His second in command was Sergeant Park Ji-woo, younger but with serious eyes that seemed to see everything. Private Lee Dobbin was the squad's communications specialist. She was small but had a voice that could be heard across the entire base when she needed to give orders. Corporal Choi Min-soo handled heavy weapons. He was quiet most of the time but smiled often when talking with his squad mates. "So you're our alien observer," Captain Kim said when they met. He held out his hand. Feltar stared at it for several seconds before realizing the human wanted him to grasp it. "I am Feltar of the Cytherian Collective," he replied. "I am here to study your combat methods." Park Ji-woo laughed. "Combat methods? Captain, I think he expects us to have a plan." "We have plans," Kim said with a grin. "Lots of them. Most of them don't work, but we make new ones." This confused Feltar greatly. How could they make battle plans that they expected to fail? How could they be so casual about warfare? Among his people, every battle was carefully calculated. Every move was planned 3 steps ahead. Victory came through superior strategy and technology. The human squad showed him to his quarters. The room was small and plain, but they had tried to make it comfortable. Dobbin had left some human books about military history. Min-soo had brought extra blankets because he thought Feltar might get cold. These gestures made no logical sense, but seemed important to the humans. Over the following days, Feltar observed the squad's training. Their exercises were strange. Sometimes they would practice the same tactical movement for hours until it was perfect. Other times they would throw out their plans completely and improvise new solutions on the spot. "Why do you train this way?" Veltar asked Captain Kim during a break. Kim wiped sweat from his forehead and sat down on a supply crate. "Because the enemy never does what you expect," he said. "You can make all the perfect plans you want, but when the shooting starts, everything changes. So we learn to think fast and adapt. But adaptation requires emotional responses," Veltar said. "Fear, anger, excitement, these cloud logical thinking." "Maybe," Kim replied. "But logic doesn't help when you're outgunned and outnumbered. Sometimes you need to feel something to find the strength to keep fighting." Veltar did not understand. In his experience, emotion was weakness. Cytherians won battles through careful planning and superior technology. They never needed to feel anything. The squad tried to include him in their social activities. Park Ji-woo invited him to play card games in the evening. Dobbin attempted to teach him human jokes. Min-soo shared stories about his family back on Earth. They seemed to think these activities were important for unit cohesion. "We're not just soldiers," Dobbin explained one night as they sat around a small heater. "We're family. When the fighting starts, we don't just fight for our mission, we fight for each other." "Family bonds are inefficient in combat," Veltar replied. "Emotional attachments can cause soldiers to make poor tactical decisions." "Maybe," said Min-soo quietly. "But they also give us reasons to never give up." Veltar filed away these observations in his memory. Human military doctrine seemed to rely heavily on emotional bonds and instinctive responses. It was the opposite of everything he had been taught about warfare. Then the alert came. Devourer scouts had been detected at the edge of the system. A large fleet was approaching Kepler 442b. All military units were ordered to prepare for battle. Though, change in the human base was immediate and dramatic. The chaos of normal activities transformed into organized preparation. Weapons were loaded, vehicles were fueled, soldiers checked and rechecked their equipment. But something else changed too. The casual jokes stopped. Conversations became quieter and more serious. Veltar noticed that the humans touched each other more. Hands on shoulders, brief embraces, gentle pats on the back. "They're scared," he realized. Captain Kim overheard him. "Of course we're scared," he said simply. "Anyone who isn't scared of the Devourers is either stupid or insane." "Fear will make you fight poorly," Veltar said. "It will cloud your judgment." Kim looked at him for a long moment. "You know, that's what everyone thinks about fear, but you're wrong. Fear doesn't make you weak. Fear makes you careful. It makes you fight harder to protect the people you care about. And sometimes, when everything goes wrong and all your fancy plans fall apart, fear is what keeps you alive." Veltar did not understand, but he was about to learn. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark cloud. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Black organic shapes that pulsed with stolen energy. They moved in patterns that hurt to watch, as if they existed partially outside normal space. The first battle was about to begin, and Veltar would finally see what humans were truly capable of when they had something to protect. The weeks before the main Devourer fleet arrived were filled with preparation. Veltar spent every day with Squad 7, watching their routines and trying to understand their strange ways. Each morning began with what humans called physical training. The squad would run together around the base perimeter, their feet hitting the ground in rhythm. Veltar could have covered the same distance in half the time using his enhanced leg muscles, but the humans insisted he keep their pace. "It's not about speed," Park Ji-woo explained as they jogged. "It's about doing it together. When we're all tired and breathing hard, we know we can count on each other." After running, they would exercise their bodies in ways that seemed pointless to Veltar. Lifting heavy objects and putting them down again, pulling themselves up on metal bars, pushing their bodies against the ground repeatedly. Cytherian warriors maintained their strength through genetic enhancement and medical treatments. This crude physical training seemed wasteful, But he noticed something interesting. While they exercised, the humans talked constantly. They encouraged each other when someone struggled. They made jokes to distract from pain. They celebrated small victories together. "Come on, Minsu," Dobbin would shout when the quiet corporal was doing push-ups. 10 more, you can do it." "My arms are going to fall off," Minsu would reply, but he would keep going anyway. "Better than your head falling off in battle." "Parky," Jiwoo would add, and everyone would laugh. These conversations served no logical purpose that Veltar could see, but the humans seemed to draw energy from them. They pushed their bodies harder when their squad mates were watching and encouraging them. The training exercises were equally confusing. Human military tactics focused heavily on small unit coordination. Unlike Cytherian forces, which operated with precise individual roles, human squads seemed to function as single organisms. During one exercise, Veltar watched Squad 7 practice room clearing. Each member had a specific job, but they constantly adjusted their positions based on what the others were doing. When Minsu's weapon jammed during the drill, Dobbin immediately shifted to cover his sector while Park Jiwoo helped him fix the problem. Captain Kim changed the entire squad's movement pattern without giving any verbal orders. "How did you know to adjust your positions?" Veltar asked afterward. "Experience," Kim replied. "We've been fighting together for 3 years. We know how each other thinks. But what if one of you is replaced? Your entire tactical system would collapse." "Then we adapt," Dobbin said simply. "We've had new members before. It takes time to learn how they move and think, but eventually they become part of the team." This seemed incredibly inefficient to Veltar. Cytherian military units could function with any combination of soldiers because everyone followed the same protocols exactly. Individual personality never affected tactical performance. The humans also spent considerable time on activities that had no apparent military value. In the evenings, they would gather in the recreation area to play games, share meals, and tell stories. Park Jiwoo was an excellent storyteller. He would describe his childhood in Busan, painting pictures with words of fishing boats and morning markets. His stories always made the others laugh or grow quiet with homesickness. Dabin liked to play card games that involved bluffing and psychology. She was exceptionally good at reading facial expressions and body language. During these games, Veltar began to understand that humans communicated far more information than just their spoken words. Minsu was quieter, but he showed care for his squad mates in practical ways. He would repair their equipment without being asked. He remembered everyone's favorite foods and would save extra portions for them. He never spoke much about his own family, but he kept a small photo in his jacket pocket that he would look at when he thought no one was watching. Captain Kim seemed to be everyone's father figure, though he was not much older than the others. He listened to their problems and gave advice. He settled arguments before they became serious conflicts. He made sure everyone felt included and valued. Dr. Han So-young visited the base frequently during this period. She was a xenobiologist studying the differences between human and Cytherian physiology. Her work fascinated Veltar, even though her conclusions often contradicted his understanding of biology. "Your species has optimized itself for logical thinking," she explained during one of their conversations. "You've eliminated the brain chemistry that produces strong emotions, but emotions serve important evolutionary purposes." "Such as?" Veltar asked. "Fear keeps organisms alive by making them careful around dangers. Anger provides energy for fighting when cornered. Love creates bonds that ensure group survival. Joy rewards behaviors that benefit the community. You've removed the biological basis for all of these." "We have removed weaknesses that clouded our judgment," Veltar replied. "Cytherians make better decisions because we are not influenced by irrational impulses." Dr. Han studied him with curious eyes. "But can you make creative decisions? Can you adapt when your logical plans fail? Can you find strength you didn't know you had when everything seems hopeless?" Veltar considered this. Cytherian military doctrine was based on overwhelming superiority and careful planning. They rarely faced situations where adaptation was necessary. When they did encounter unexpected problems, they typically withdrew to replan their approach. Humans fascinate me, Dr. Hahn continued. Your brains are constantly generating new neural pathways. Stress and emotion actually increase your ability to form creative solutions. It's messy and inefficient most of the time, but in crisis situations it can produce remarkable results. You speak of emotion as if it were beneficial, Veltar said. It is beneficial. Fear doesn't just warn you about danger. It gives you energy to run faster and think faster than normally possible. Love doesn't just create social bonds. It makes individuals willing to sacrifice themselves for group survival. Even negative emotions serve purposes. Veltar filed this information away, but he remained skeptical. He had seen human emotional responses, and they still seemed chaotic and counterproductive to him. One evening, the base received news that changed everything. Long-range sensors had detected the main Devourer fleet. It was massive, thousands of ships stretching across light-years of space. And it was heading directly toward human and Catherian territory. The mood in the base changed immediately. The casual joking stopped. Conversations became quieter and more focused. Soldiers spent more time checking their weapons and equipment. The recreational activities continued, but there was an underlying tension that everyone felt. Veltar noticed that the humans began touching each other more frequently. Brief hand squeezes, pats on the shoulder, longer embraces when they thought no one was watching. At first he assumed this was fear-driven behavior, but then he realized it was actually comforting behavior. They were drawing strength from physical contact with their squad mates. "Are you afraid?" he asked Captain Kim one night as they stood watching the stars. Kim was quiet for a long moment. "Terrified," he finally said. "We all are." "Then why do you continue to prepare for battle?" Logic would suggest withdrawing to a safer position. Kim smiled sadly. "Because we have things worth protecting. My squad mates, our families back home, our way of life. Fear doesn't make us want to run away. It makes us want to fight harder to protect what we care about. But fear clouds judgment. It causes mistakes." "Sometimes," Kim agreed. "But it also does something else. It makes you creative. When you're scared and desperate, your brain starts working in ways it never would during calm moments. You find solutions you never would have thought of otherwise." Veltar did not understand this concept, but he sensed it would become important soon. The Devourer advance scouts arrived in the system 2 days later. The real battle was about to begin, and Veltar would finally see whether human emotions were weakness or strength. The first battle began at dawn on a Tuesday. Veltar remembered this detail because humans seem to find meaning in such ordinary moments becoming extraordinary. The Devourer scouts had landed on the far side of Kepler 442b during the night. Satellite images showed 3 dark ships that looked like massive insects made of metal and flesh. Within hours of landing, they had begun consuming everything around them: rocks, plants, even the air itself. Squad 7 was part of a larger force sent to investigate, and if possible destroy the scout ships before they could report back to the main fleet. The plan was simple: approach under cover of darkness, plant explosives, and retreat before the Devourers could respond. Veltar rode in the transport with the human squad. His crystalline armor gleamed even in the dim interior light. His plasma rifle was charged and ready. By all logical measures, he was the most powerful fighter in the vehicle. But as they approached the landing zone, he noticed something strange about the humans. They were not calm like Catherian warriors would be. Their heart rates had increased. Their breathing was faster. Some of them were sweating despite the cool air. "First time seeing Devourers up close," Captain Kim said to him, quietly. "It's different from the training simulations." Through the transport's small windows, Veltar could see the enemy ships in the distance. They were larger than he had expected, and they pulsed with an organic rhythm that was disturbing to watch. The ground around them had turned black and lifeless. "They're bigger than I thought," Minsu said, his voice quieter than usual. "Size doesn't matter," Dabin replied, but Veltar noticed her hands were gripping her rifle more tightly than necessary. "Everyone stay focused," Park Jiwoo said. We stick to the plan. Get in, plant the charges, get out. But Veltar could sense the fear radiating from all of them. Their emotional control was failing before the battle had even begun. This confirmed his belief that human psychological responses were a weakness in combat situations. The transport stopped 2 kilometers from the target zone. Squad 7 disembarked with the other human units, while Veltar's Cytherian support team took position on a nearby ridge. The plan called for the humans to approach on foot, while the Cytherians provided covering fire with their superior weapons. The advance began smoothly. The human squads moved in coordinated groups using natural cover and maintaining communication discipline. Veltar had to admit their tactical movement was competent, even if it was slower than Cytherian forces would have managed. But as they got closer to the Devourer ships, things began to go wrong. The first problem was the terrain. The area around the enemy ships was not just lifeless, it was actively hostile. The ground had been transformed into something that felt wrong to walk on. It seemed to shift and move under their feet. The air itself felt thick and poisonous. Minsu was the first to react badly to the environment. He stopped suddenly, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "I can't. Something's wrong with this place," he said. "It's just the Devourer influence," Captain Kim said, but Veltar could hear the strain in his voice. "Keep moving." The second problem was the ships themselves. As they got closer, the organic pulsing became more intense. Veltar realized that the ships were not just machines, they were alive. They were breathing, and they were aware of the approaching attack force. "Contact front," someone whispered over the radio. Dark shapes began emerging from the ships. They were not like any soldiers Veltar had ever seen. They moved wrong, as if they existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. Their weapons seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, and they fired energy that felt cold and hungry. The human squads opened fire immediately, but their weapons, which worked perfectly against normal enemies, seemed almost useless against the Devourers. The energy bolts were absorbed or deflected. The few hits that connected seemed to heal almost instantly. "Fall back," Captain Kim ordered. "Regroup at checkpoint Alpha." But the Devourers had anticipated this. More shapes emerged from concealed positions, cutting off the retreat routes. The human force was surrounded. This was when Veltar expected to see human morale collapse. Surrounded, outgunned, facing an enemy their weapons could not effectively damage. Logic dictated immediate surrender or panic. Instead, he witnessed something he had never seen before. Minsu, who had been struggling with fear since they entered the contaminated zone, suddenly stopped retreating. A Devourer construct was advancing on 2 wounded soldiers from another squad. Without hesitation, Minsu threw himself between them and the enemy. "Cover me!" he shouted, and began firing his rifle in full automatic mode. The shots still did little damage, but they drew the construct's attention away from the wounded soldiers. Park Ji-woo immediately responded, flanking the enemy position while Da-bin provided suppressing fire. Captain Kim adjusted the squad's position to better support Minsu's desperate stand. Veltar watched in amazement as the humans' fear seemed to transform into something else. They were not fleeing from danger. They were moving toward it to protect each other. "Minsu, get out of there," Da-bin shouted over the gunfire. "Not without them," Minsu replied, indicating the wounded soldiers. This made no tactical sense. The wounded soldiers were not part of Squad 7. Saving them provided no strategic advantage. But Minsu continued to hold his position while Park Ji-woo and another soldier dragged the wounded men to safety. The Cytherian support team finally opened fire from their ridge position. Their plasma weapons were more effective against the Devourers, causing real damage and forcing the enemy to take cover. But even their superior technology was not enough to break the encirclement. "We need to retreat," the Cytherian commander's voice came over Veltar's communicator. "This position is untenable." But the humans were not retreating. Despite being surrounded, despite their weapons being largely ineffective, despite facing an enemy that violated their understanding of physics, they were still fighting. Captain Kim had reorganized the scattered squads into a defensive perimeter. Wounded soldiers were moved to the center while others maintained covering fire. No one was abandoned, no one was left behind. Why are they not withdrawing? Veltar asked himself. Then he saw something that changed his understanding completely. A massive devourer construct, larger than any they had encountered before, emerged from the main ship. It moved directly toward the human perimeter, and Veltar could see that their weapons would be completely useless against it. The logical response would be to flee immediately. But Captain Kim stepped forward, alone, to face the construct. All squads, concentrate fire on that thing, he ordered. Everything you have. Captain, the weapons are not effective, Park Ji-woo protested. Then we make them effective, Kim replied. What happened next defied everything Veltar understood about combat. The human soldiers began coordinating their fire in patterns he had never seen. Instead of trying to damage the construct directly, they targeted the ground around it, creating explosions that destabilized its movement. When that did not work, they began using their weapons to create barriers of debris and smoke. Dabin started calling out tactical observations faster than Veltar could follow. It's avoiding the burning chemical spills from the damaged equipment. The light seems to disorient it. It's having trouble tracking multiple targets. The humans began using their environment in ways that had never occurred to Veltar. They turned their apparent disadvantage into advantages through sheer creative desperation. But the construct was still advancing, and their improvised tactics could only delay it briefly. That was when Minsu did something that shocked everyone. He grabbed several explosive charges, more than enough to destroy the construct, but also more than enough to kill anyone carrying them. He began running directly toward the enemy. Minsu, no! Captain Kim shouted. But Minsu was not listening. His fear had transformed into something else entirely, a desperate need to protect his squadmates no matter the cost. Veltar watched as the quiet corporal charged toward certain death, and finally began to understand what Captain Kim had tried to tell him about human fear. It was not weakness, it was the source of impossible courage. The siege of Sanctuary Station began 3 weeks after the disaster at the Outer Rim. Veltar stood in the command center, watching tactical displays that showed thousands of Devourer ships approaching the most important human research facility. In this sector of the galaxy, Minsu had survived his desperate charge, though barely. Park Ji-woo had tackled him at the last second, and together they had thrown the explosives at the construct before diving behind a damaged transport. The explosion had destroyed the enemy, but both soldiers spent 2 weeks in the medical bay, recovering from their injuries. During those weeks, Veltar had replayed the battle in his mind countless times. He had expected the humans to break under pressure, but instead they had fought harder. Their fear had made them more protective of each other, not less effective as soldiers. Now they faced a much larger threat. The main Devourer fleet had arrived, and Sanctuary Station was their primary target. The research facility contained Dr. Han So-young's xenobiology labs, as well as crucial intelligence about Devourer weaknesses that both species had been gathering. Squad 7 had been assigned to the station's defense force. Minsu walked with a slight limp now, and Park Ji-woo's left arm was still in a support brace. But both had refused medical leave when the call came for volunteers to defend the station. We're not leaving our squad mates, Minsu had said simply when the medical staff tried to keep him in the hospital. The station itself was impressive, a massive structure built into an asteroid, with multiple levels of laboratories, living quarters, and defensive positions. Human and Catherian forces had worked together to prepare its defenses, but everyone knew the odds were terrible. Intelligence estimates show approximately 3,000 enemy ships. Captain Kim briefed the assembled defenders. Our fleet can handle maybe 500 before they're overwhelmed. The rest will reach the station. Veltar stood with his Catherian unit near the back of the briefing room. His fellow warriors listened with their usual calm attention, calculating odds and tactical probabilities. The humans in the room showed much more visible emotion, tension in their faces, worry in their voices when they asked questions. "What about evacuation?" someone asked. "No evacuation," Kim replied firmly. "If we lose the research data here, both our species lose our best chance of finding a way to stop the Devourers permanently. We hold this station no matter what." Dr. Baugh, Han So-young stepped forward to address the group. My research has identified several potential weaknesses in devourer biology, but I need more time to develop effective weapons. You need to buy me that time. How much time? Dobbin asked. At least 72 hours. Maybe more. A murmur went through the human soldiers. 72 hours against impossible odds. Veltar calculated that the station's defenses might last 12 hours at most against the approaching fleet, but the humans did not seem to be considering surrender. Instead, they began planning how to make their impossible task possible. The first wave hit the station 18 hours later. Veltar was positioned in Section C with Squad 7, manning defensive barriers near one of the main docking bays. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the devourer ships approaching like a dark cloud. The station's defensive weapons opened fire first. Plasma cannons and missile batteries created a wall of destruction around the facility. For a few minutes, it seemed like the defenses might actually hold. Then the devourers began adapting. The first few ships to be destroyed were quickly consumed by others, which analyzed the weapon signatures and developed countermeasures. Within an hour, the station's most powerful guns were useless. The enemy ship simply absorbed the energy and redirected it back at the defenders. Outer defense grid is down, came the announcement over the communication system. All units prepare for boarding actions. Veltar checked his weapons one final time. His plasma rifle was fully charged and his crystalline armor would provide excellent protection. By all logical measures, he was ready for combat. But he noticed that the humans were preparing differently. They were checking not just their own equipment, but each other's as well. Dobbin helped Park Ji-woo adjust his arm brace so it would not interfere with his shooting. Min-soo redistributed ammunition to ensure everyone had equal supplies. Captain Kim moved through the group, offering quiet words of encouragement. Stay together, Kim told them. Watch each other's backs. We've been through worse. Veltar doubted this last statement was true, but the others seemed to draw comfort from it. The first devourer boarding pods struck the station like meteors. Veltar felt the entire structure shake as dozens of impact points sent tremors through the metal and rock. Emergency lighting activated as main power fluctuated. Contact in Section A, came a voice over the radio. Heavy resistance needed. Contact in Section D. We're being overwhelmed. Medical team to Section F. Multiple casualties. The reports came faster than anyone could respond to them. The devourers were not just attacking, they were consuming the station itself. Walls began dissolving as the enemy creatures absorbed metal and rock, growing larger and more powerful. In Section C, Squad 7 waited tensely for their turn. Through the corridor windows, they could see emergency lights flashing throughout the station. Smoke was beginning to fill the air recycling systems. Then their door exploded inward. The creatures that poured through were nightmares made flesh. They moved like liquid shadow, changing shape as they advanced. Their weapons were extensions of their own bodies, firing energy that seemed to drain life itself. Squad 7 opened fire immediately. But just like in the previous battle, their weapons had limited effect. The creatures absorbed most of the energy bolts and healed from the few that caused damage. Fall back to secondary positions, Captain Kim ordered. But as they retreated, Veltar noticed something strange. The humans were not just running away. They were retreating in an organized pattern that drew the creatures into carefully prepared positions. When the devourers followed them deeper into the section, they found themselves in a corridor lined with improvised explosive devices. Dabin triggered the charges remotely, bringing down huge sections of ceiling onto the advancing enemies. This actually worked. The creatures could absorb energy weapons, but they seemed vulnerable to physical crushing damage. Did you see that? Park Ji-woo said excitedly. They can't heal from structural damage as easily. Within minutes, the information was being shared across the station's communication network. Human defenders began improvising new tactics based on this discovery. Instead of relying on energy weapons, they started using the station's environment against the invaders. Maintenance crews rerouted power systems to create electrical traps. Engineering teams destabilized air recycling systems to create poisonous atmosphere in sealed sections. Medical staff discovered that certain chemical compounds could slow the creature's healing abilities. But the most remarkable thing Veltar observed was how the humans shared these discoveries immediately with everyone else. In Cytherian military doctrine, tactical advantages were carefully controlled and distributed through proper command channels. Humans simply shouted their discoveries over open communication channels for anyone to use. Section G, try using the fire suppression systems. The chemical foam slows them down. Confirmed. Industrial solvents also work. Maintenance has extra supplies in Storage Bay 12. Watch out for the larger ones. They adapt faster than the smaller ones. This chaotic information sharing should have been inefficient, but instead it was creating a collective intelligence that adapted faster than any individual unit could manage. The battle raged for hours. Veltar found himself fighting alongside Squad 7 in ways he had never imagined. When his plasma rifle proved ineffective, Minsu handed him a human explosive device and showed him how to use it. When structural damage trapped them in a collapsed section, Dobbin found an alternate route through maintenance shafts that only her small size allowed her to explore. Most importantly, when Veltar was cornered by a massive devourer construct, Captain Kim and Park Ji-woo immediately abandoned their own defensive positions to help him. They had no logical reason to risk their lives for a Cytherian observer, but they did it without hesitation. "No one gets left behind," Kim said simply as they helped Veltar escape the collapsing section. After 12 hours of continuous fighting, the station was still holding. Sections had been lost and retaken multiple times. Casualties were mounting, on both sides. But the human defenders had not broken. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "All units, this is Dr. Han. I need volunteers for an extremely dangerous mission. We've found a way to poison the devourer hive mind, but someone needs to get close enough to their command ship to deploy it." It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The command ship was surrounded by hundreds of smaller vessels, and it was continuously adapting to every weapon the defenders used. Veltar expected a long discussion about who should be selected for such a dangerous task. Instead, nearly every human in the station volunteered immediately. Captain Kim Tae-ho was dying, and Veltar did not know what to do about it. The mission to the Devourer command ship had been a disaster. Of the 12 volunteers who had attempted to breach the enemy vessel, only 3 had survived: Veltar, Park Ji-woo, and Captain Kim. They had managed to plant Dr. Han's biological weapon in the ship's core, but the explosion that followed had sent debris through Kim's chest. Now they were trapped in an escape pod drifting in space, watching the Devourer fleet tear itself apart as the poison spread through their hive mind. The mission had succeeded, but Captain Kim was bleeding to death and there was nothing Veltar could do to save him. "Did we get them?" Kim asked weakly. His face was pale and his breathing was shallow. "Yes," Veltar replied. "The weapon is working. The entire fleet is turning on itself." Kim smiled despite his pain. "Good. That's good." Park Ji-woo was trying to stop the bleeding with medical supplies from the pod's emergency kit, but they all knew it was not enough. Kim needed surgery and blood transfusions that they could not provide. "Don't look so worried, Ji-woo," Kim said. "We did what we came to do." "The rescue ships will find us soon," Park Ji-woo replied, but his voice betrayed his doubt. They were drifting in a debris field from the destroyed Devourer ships. It could take days for anyone to locate their small pod. Veltar found himself studying Kim's face as the human captain struggled with his injuries. In Cytherian culture, warriors who were mortally wounded in battle were given honor drugs that eliminated pain and allowed them to die with dignity and calm. But Kim seemed determined to stay conscious and alert despite his suffering. "Why do you not request pain medication?" Veltar asked. Kim turned his head slightly to look at him. "Because I want to see how this ends. I want to know that my people are safe." This made no logical sense to Veltar. Kim's survival would not affect the outcome of the battle. His continued consciousness served no tactical purpose, but the human captain seemed to find meaning in witnessing the result of his sacrifice. "Tell me about your species," Kim said suddenly. "Before you met humans, what were battles like for your people?" Veltar considered the question. Efficient. We would analyze enemy capabilities, develop superior strategies, deploy overwhelming force. Victory was achieved through logical planning and technological advantage. Did you ever lose? Rarely. When we did, it was due to miscalculation or insufficient intelligence about enemy capabilities. Kim coughed and Veltar could see blood on his lips. And after battles, what happened to the wounded? Those who could be healed were treated. Those who could not were given honor drugs and allowed to die peacefully. No one stayed with them? Veltar paused. Stayed with them for what purpose? Talk. To hold their hands. To make sure they didn't die alone. This concept was foreign to Veltar. Death is a biological process. The presence of others does not change its outcome. Kim smiled weakly. No, but it changes what the dying person experiences. It changes whether their last moments are filled with connection or isolation. Park Ji-woo had been listening to their conversation while continuing to work on Kim's wounds. Captain, save your strength. For what? Kim replied. I'm not getting out of this pod alive, and we all know it. So let me use the time I have left for something useful. He turned back to Veltar. You've been watching us for months now. What have you learned about humans? Veltar thought carefully before answering. I have learned that your species makes many decisions that appear illogical. You risk your lives for individuals who provide no strategic value. You form emotional attachments that can be exploited by enemies. You allow fear and other emotions to influence your tactical thinking. And somehow this makes you more effective in combat than your capabilities should allow. Kim nodded slowly. Do you understand why? Veltar was quiet for several minutes, thinking about everything he had witnessed. The desperate charge at the Outer Rim battle, the improvised tactics during the siege, the immediate volunteering for suicide missions, the way humans shared tactical discoveries instantly with everyone else. I think, he said finally, it has something to do with what you are fighting for. Explain. Catherians fight to achieve objectives. Humans fight to protect something. The difference creates different behaviors under stress. What kind of different behaviors? Veltar recalled specific moments from their battles together. When cornered, Catherians calculate the probability of success and surrender if the odds are too poor. Humans in the same situation fight harder. Why do you think that is? Because surrender means abandoning what you are trying to protect. The tactical situation becomes irrelevant if the people you care about will be harmed. Kim's breathing was becoming more labored, but he continued the conversation. What else have you noticed? Humans adapt faster in crisis situations. When your original plans fail, you improvise new solutions immediately. Catherians withdraw to replan their approach. And why do humans adapt faster? Veltar thought about Dr. Han's research on emotion and brain chemistry. Because fear and desperation create new neural pathways. Stress hormones enhance creative thinking. But you said earlier that emotions cloud judgment. I was wrong, Veltar admitted. Emotions do not cloud judgment, they change judgment. They make you consider options that pure logic would dismiss as too risky or unconventional. Park Ji-woo looked up from his medical work. Like charging a devourer construct with a bag full of explosives? Yes, Veltar said. Logic would have calculated that action as suicide with no probability of success. But fear for your squad mates made it seem like the only acceptable choice. Kim nodded with effort. Fear doesn't make you weak, Veltar. Fear makes you willing to do impossible things when something you love is threatened. Through the pod's small window, they could see the last of the devourer ships destroying each other as the biological weapons spread through their collective consciousness. The immediate threat was over, but Veltar was beginning to understand that he had learned something more important than military tactics. Your species has not removed weaknesses, he said to Kim. You have turned emotions into weapons. Not weapons, Kim corrected gently. Tools. Emotions are tools for survival and connection. Fear keeps you alive. Love gives you strength. Even sadness serves a purpose. What purpose does sadness serve? It makes you remember what you've lost. It makes you determined not to lose anything else. Park Ji-woo had stopped working on Kim's wounds. They all knew there was nothing more he could do with the supplies available. "Captain," Park Ji-woo said quietly, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor has been mine," Kim replied. "Take care of the squad. Take care of each other." He turned to Veltar one final time. "Will you tell your people what you've learned here?" "Yes," Veltar promised. "Tell them that fear is not the enemy of courage. Fear is what gives courage meaning. Anyone can be brave when there's nothing to lose. Real courage is being afraid and acting anyway because you have something worth protecting." Kim's eyes closed and his breathing became very slow and shallow. "Captain," Park Ji-woo said softly, but Kim was no longer conscious. Veltar sat in the small pod watching a human warrior die slowly and in pain, and for the first time in his life, he understood what his species had lost when they eliminated their capacity for emotion. They had gained logical thinking and tactical precision, but they had lost the ability to care about anything enough to fight for it when logic said the battle was hopeless. Outside the pod, the debris from the destroyed Devourer fleet drifted silently in space. The war was over, but Veltar's education was just beginning. The final battle for Earth took place 6 months after Captain Kim's death. Veltar stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching thousands of ships prepare for what everyone knew would be the last fight of the war. The Devourer mothership had appeared in Earth's solar system 3 days earlier. It was larger than any celestial body Veltar had ever seen. A living planet covered in organic weapons and filled with the collective consciousness of the entire enemy species. Dr. Han's biological weapon had destroyed most of their fleet, but the survivors had merged into this final, desperate form. If the mothership reached Earth, it would consume every living thing on the planet within hours. Veltar had changed in the months since Kim's death. The experience of watching a human warrior die for his beliefs had started something new, growing in Veltar's crystalline brain. Dr. Han called it emotional development, the slow growth of neural pathways that his species had bred out of themselves generations ago. It was painful and confusing. Veltar found himself thinking about Squad 7 at unexpected moments. He worried about their safety during routine missions. He felt proud when they succeeded and disappointed when they failed. These feelings served no logical purpose, but they had become part of who he was. Park Ji-woo had taken command of Squad 7 after Kim's death. The promotion had been difficult for him. He was younger than Kim had been and felt the weight of responsibility heavily. But Dabin and Min-soo supported him completely, and together they had recruited 2 new members to replace their losses. "You don't have to do this," Park Ji-woo told Veltar as they prepared for the final assault on the mothership. "You've already done more than anyone could have expected." Veltar was adjusting his equipment in the transport bay, preparing to join the boarding party that would attempt to destroy the mothership from within. It was the same type of suicide mission that had killed Captain Kim, but it was the only strategy that had any chance of success. "Yes, I do have to do this," Veltar replied. "I understand that now." Dabin looked up from checking her communications equipment. "Understand what?" "Why humans fight impossible battles. It is not about the probability of success. It is about having something worth protecting." Min-soo smiled. He had become much more talkative since Kim's death, as if he felt responsible for filling the silence their captain had left behind. "And what are you protecting?" Veltar considered the question seriously. 6 months ago he would have said he was protecting the strategic alliance between humans and Catherians, but that was not the real answer anymore. "I am protecting my friends," he said simply. This declaration seemed to surprise the humans. They had grown accustomed to Veltar's logical, analytical responses to everything. Hearing him use the word friends was unexpected. "When did we become friends?" Dabin asked with a curious smile. "I think it happened gradually," Veltar replied. "I did not notice it at first because my species does not form emotional attachments easily. But somewhere between the Outer Rim battle and Captain Kim's death, you stopped being subjects for observation and became people I cared about." Park Ji-woo nodded slowly. Captain Kim would have been proud to hear you say that. He already knew, Veltar said. In the escape pod before he died, he told me that emotions are tools for survival and connection. I think he saw what was happening to me before I understood it myself. The transport shuddered as it detached from the flagship and began its approach to the mothership. Through the windows they could see the massive organic structure that filled most of their view. It pulsed with a rhythm that hurt to look at, as if it existed partially outside normal space-time. First wave is engaging the outer defenses, came the pilot's voice over the intercom. Hold on everyone, it's going to get rough. The plan was complex but desperate. Multiple boarding parties would attempt to penetrate the mothership's hull at different points, while the main fleet kept its defensive weapons busy. Each party carried a portion of Dr. Han's improved biological weapon. They needed to plant all the pieces in the creature's central nervous system simultaneously to have any hope of success. But everyone knew the odds were terrible. The mothership had been learning and adapting for months. Its defenses would be unlike anything they had faced before. Contact in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Veltar felt something he had never experienced before. A tight feeling in his chest, rapid breathing, increased heart rate. For a moment he thought he was having a medical emergency. Then he realized what it was. He was afraid. Not the calculated concern for mission success that Catherians experienced in dangerous situations. This was raw emotional terror at the thought of his friends being hurt or killed. Are you okay? Dobbin asked, noticing his distress. I think I am experiencing fear for the first time, Veltar said. Minsu laughed, but not in a mocking way. Welcome to being human. The trick is not to let it paralyze you. How do you function with these feelings? You use them, Park Ji-woo said. The fear means you understand what's at stake. It makes you more careful, more creative, more determined to succeed. The transport struck the mothership's hull with tremendous force. Emergency lights activated as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Through the hull breach they could see the interior of the creature, passages that pulsed like arteries, walls that seemed to breathe, and organic growths that reached toward them with hungry intent. Go, 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 Park Ji-woo shouted. Squad 7 poured through the breach into the mothership's interior, with Veltar close behind them. The environment inside was even worse than the outer ships had been. The air felt thick and poisonous. The surfaces underfoot shifted and moved like living tissue. Worst of all, the creature seemed aware of their presence immediately. Defensive organisms emerged from the walls, things that looked like a nightmare combination of machines and insects. They moved faster than anything the boarding party had faced before, and their weapons seemed designed specifically to counter human and Catherian technology. Weapons are not penetrating, Minsu reported, as his rifle fire was absorbed by the approaching creatures. Then we improvise, Park Ji-woo replied. Look for environmental weaknesses. This was where months of fighting together paid off. Squad 7 had learned to function as a single organism, adapting instantly to changing conditions. When there you are, weapons proved ineffective. They immediately began looking for alternate solutions. Dabin noticed that the organic passages were filled with a network of nerve fibers that seemed to carry information throughout the creature. If we can disrupt those neural pathways, it might slow down the defensive responses, she suggested. Veltar found himself thinking faster and more creatively than he ever had before. The fear that filled his mind was not clouding his judgment. It was enhancing it, just as Dr. Han had predicted. The weapon components we carry are biochemically active. If we can inject them directly into the neural network, we can poison the creature's nervous system from multiple points simultaneously, Park Ji-woo finished. Even if the other boarding parties fail, we might be able to complete the mission ourselves. It was an insane plan. They would have to split up and inject their weapon components into different parts of the neural network, while under constant attack from the creature's defenses. The probability of all of them surviving was essentially zero. But Veltar found himself volunteering immediately. I will take the forward section. My crystalline armor provides better protection than human equipment. No, Dobbin said firmly. We stay together. That's what Captain Kim would have done. Captain Kim is dead because he tried to protect everyone, Veltar pointed out. And we're alive because he did, Minsu replied. We don't abandon our friends. That's not who we are. Veltar looked at their faces and saw the same expression Captain Kim had worn during their final conversation in the escape pod. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. But they were more afraid of abandoning each other than they were of dying. Then we do this together, Veltar said. What followed was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of Veltar's existence. Squad 7 moved through the mothership's organic corridors like a living weapon, adapting to every challenge the creature threw at them. When defensive organisms blocked their path, they found alternate routes. When neural pathways were too heavily guarded, they created diversions. Most importantly, they protected each other. When Veltar was overwhelmed by a swarm of small defenders, Minsu and Dabin immediately came to his aid. When Park Ji-woo was injured by organic acids, Veltar carried him until he could walk again. They reached the central nervous system after what felt like hours of continuous fighting. The chamber was enormous, a cathedral-sized space filled with pulsing neural tissue and organic computing systems. It was beautiful and horrifying at the same time. There, Dabin pointed to connection, points where major neural pathways converged. If we can inject the weapon into those nodes, it should spread throughout the entire nervous system. They were almost out of time. The creature had realized what they were trying to do, and was concentrating its defenses around the central chamber. More defensive organisms were pouring in through every entrance. Cover me, Veltar said, moving toward the nearest injection point.